I think when we hold on to identities or we think we're a certain way and we're not open to evolving or, really allowing ourselves to be seen in all parts, that's when I definitely feel this stagnancy in people's business and in the online space. Yet I always feel it begins with this self-awareness. And I feel like when we all are sort of, transitioning and showing up and owning it, it starts with that piece. And I feel when we understand our story and why we do what we do, in order for us to be authentic and building a brand, we have to let go of fear of judgment within ourselves to step into authenticity.
Welcome to today's episode of Influence by Design. I am your host, Samantha Riley, and today we are chatting with Tamara Meyer. We're going to have a really great conversation about branding, which is her zone of genius. We're going to talk about all sorts of exciting and juicy branding pieces and how to tie it all together to sell, because let's face it, we're in business to sell. So welcome, Tamara. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Samantha. And I'm all for creative juices and just bringing more incredible support for all the listeners today. So thank you for having me, Queen.
Oh, so excited. I love that, Queen. I love that you call everyone Queen. Before we even start, I actually want to know, where did that come from?
It's funny. I actually know where this came from, but I used to be in the fitness space as a professional athlete, and I used to always envision myself like Beyonce whenever I would be on the treadmill, absolutely killing myself, getting ready for a comp. And I used to have a slogan called, Slay like Beyonce. And I used to watch her at the Super Bowl 2015 performance, and it was like a 15-minute long performance. That was my thing when I would be on the treadmill, and I'd just be watching her, and she just was a queen. And so when I sort of, transitioned from fitness coach as a professional athlete into business, I wanted to have that same element of like showing up like Beyonce, but being your own version of that. And so Queen was the kind of like the thing that came for me. And ever since then, that's kind of been what I really love, really helping women with their business online. It's like having that queen energy, showing up like a queen, which is not always being, put together, glossy version, but it just really embodies that element where, you're a leader, you're vulnerable, you're feminine, you're brave. So that's how it all began, my love.
I love that because I think authenticity can be tricky for people to understand. So for me, like, I love that you've explained that. I love that, that queen energy, because for me, queen, I don't know, it just doesn't work for me personally. I don't know, but it works for you so well. Like every time I see you, it's just like queen, queen, So how do people find their version of that?
It's essentially what I love helping women with around personality with their brand, right? And authenticity is essentially all parts of us, our true self, our genuine self, also the parts that we don't really love. You can look at me right now and I've got makeup on, I've got a top on. Beneath me, I'm wearing trackies. And I'm like, but
Ah,
that's authenticity, like a true business owner. But I feel that a lot of women, when they start to open up and meant to and find out what true authenticity is to them, that's where they can start to see their unique attributes, whether your tonality and voice is serious, but really, you might have certain things that really represent that as a person. And everyone has their thing, or everyone has their unique attribute. And essentially, that can be whatever anchors for you too. And for you, it may be, you've got this beautiful energy where you're nurturing and kind. And I can see also you're a boss babe, but again, like it's finding what really works for you and reverse engineering it, which is essentially what we're going to talk about today.
yeah. Well, let's go there, because I think that when you can really lean into what that uniqueness is, that's what attracts people. And it can be very easy at the beginning of your journey as a coach to take on parts of other people, and you start to almost mimic that without even realizing.
And I love that you bring this up.
I could just see it like straight away. You're like, yes. And I actually think we all do it at the beginning as we're trying to find our way. Take us on that journey of where people can start to really lean into that, what's unique for them, because it's much easier to be yourself, right? When you're showing up or trying to show up as someone else, that's when I feel, but I'd love to hear your take on it. That's where I feel that people hold back because they're too afraid to show up because they're a little bit afraid of getting someone else's version wrong.
Totally. And again, I did this in all different identities, I like to say. And I think when we hold on to identities or we think we're a certain way and we're not open to evolving or, really allowing ourselves to be seen in all parts, that's when I definitely feel this stagnancy in people's business and in the online space. Yet I always feel it begins with this self-awareness. And I feel like when we all are sort of, transitioning and showing up and owning it, it starts with that piece. And I feel when we understand our story and why we do what we do, I begin with a really incredible framework around it's called story, right? And essentially, like when we want to step into authenticity and in branding too, a lot of people want to veer into the logos, the colors, the aesthetics, but that's for me last. That's what I always start.
Mm,
But I start with the framework story, and S, stands for significance. What are the 3 or 5 key events that have happened in your life that have shaped you for who you are, that have had an emotional connection with yourself? And a lot of times, and this is a life coaching question I used to be asked all the time, people get really like taken back by that question. And that essentially really takes them on the journey to then really finding out what the theme of their stories are. And so from story, T stands for theme. What are the themes that have been part of your life? For myself, it's perseverance, it's wealth, it's empire, it's the embodiment, it's showing up. And that's when then it leads into when it comes to storytelling and authenticity, we always have options that kind of become whether we dive into discomfort, whether we stay the same, but our options are always there to teach us a blessing or a lesson. And so O stands for,
mm,
and then this is where when we're looking at authenticity and building a brand and really speaking into this for your audience, the R stands for what was my responsibility? What are the results I had? And what's it relevant to my audience? And the last little bit, which is where we're probably going to tie into the next phase, is your values. And I think when we understand what our values are from a business, from a personal component, we can start to see how that can start to connect with our audience. And then that's how we start to show those parts because it's important to us, not anyone else. So I think
love that.
it's powerful stuff. And I can only talk about my mistakes when I was a fitness coach because I used to look to others as influencers, to the people that I really aspired to be like. And it wasn't until I realized, even transitioning into life coaching, I was like, oh, I need to be taken seriously because if I'm a business coach, life coach, and I've gone from fitness to business, they're going to think I'm this weirdo that can't decide what I want to do. But it's really my own judgment. So I feel
Hmm.
wrapping up all of that, my love, is in order for us to be authentic and building a brand, we have to let go of fear of judgment within ourselves to step into authenticity.
Oh my goodness, that is so huge. Like when you really think about that, we judge ourselves so deeply around making sure that we get it all right. And being able to let go of that is like just, hello, I'm here. I'm ready to show up now. And that's when things really change, right? I want to talk about values a little bit because I also talk about values a lot. And I don't know if you found this, but a lot of people that I speak to say, I know what values are, but I actually really struggle to find my values. What is a tip that you can give people if they're in that space?
It's interesting. I love this question too because I was this person as well. What's important to you? My tip for you and anyone listening, I find that wow, that's a really good question. I find when it comes to navigating your values, it's kind of looking at what your life is like right now. Because values essentially is why you create rules, beliefs, and decisions, right? So I find what are the things that you're holding on to that's really important to you? What's the reason you get out of bed? What's the reason that, you have rules around structure or, you have these beliefs around certain things. Maybe it's beliefs around relationship, rather, maybe it's belief around personal development, maybe it's in business, if I was to talk about values in relationship, a really big one, and for the listeners who can, reflect on this, I know that a value of mine in a relationship is essentially freedom, and not because I have time away from my partner, but it's building a life of freedom because, growing up, I came from a really dysfunctional family, and also freedom and security is a big value of mine. And again, reflecting on your upbringing, the things that I didn't really receive was security and was
Mm.
not having freedom. So I feel like sometimes it's looking at what we didn't receive growing up that will allow us to really see what values we really are connected with, because essentially it's always what we didn't get. It's why it becomes important to us. I don't know if that connects with
That definitely, I've never heard someone mention it like that, but I really know what my values are. And as you were saying that, I was like, that makes perfect sense because that is exactly, freedom for me is one of my top three values as well. And it is so important to me. And I know that that's why I do what I do. It's how I work with my clients, because that's what we didn't have when we were growing up. So that makes perfect sense. I love that so much.
I feel everyone when that hits, like they hear that as well.
Yeah,
We go back, and this is why when it comes to branding and storytelling, it's like these events that have shaped you for you hard can also be a negative thing that happened to you growing up, right? So
totally. Well, Tony Robbins talks about that, right? He talks about the way that his mother treated them, and that's the things that happened to him is why he's such a great coach now. And I think that you talked about beliefs and the lessons, and I can't remember, there was someone else that I interviewed on this podcast a while ago that calls them blessings. I can't remember who it was. And it just, as you were talking about that, it really reminded me that these things that happen to us, when we really understand that they are lessons and they are what's helped us to shape who we are now and how we show up, instead of seeing it as something bad, to bring it in and say, but this is what has made me who I am today. And I think that the blessing is a great way to look at that.
I'm going to steal that. That's really cool.
I
Yeah.
need to go back now and have a look to see who said it, because I can't remember and I want to attribute it to them. And
Maybe that's
because I
your
think
little
it's so
slogan.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's your queen slogan, babe.
I love it. So, talking about all of these things, obviously, this is, leaning into storytelling. You talk about storytelling a lot and storytelling to sell. And I really want to touch on this because I feel that a lot of people understand that they need to tell stories, and that's how we connect with our audience. And they see selling over here and, as a separate thing, and they don't understand how the two come together, and they can't like create that bridge. So I've just asked you probably a million questions all in one, so go wherever you want to go with that. Maybe start off with the storytelling.
I'll start with a story, right? Because when I was in the fitness space, again, looking to what others were doing around selling, and maybe you guys can also resonate with this. I feel like so many people don't get taught how to sell. And so for me, I watched my mum growing up being an Avon lady knocking on doors. And because I came from, before my fitness days, I came from a dance background, a professional actor and dancer. I had to sell myself based on performance, not opposed to like my story within, right? And so fitness days, a lot of people literally would just talk about when it came to selling online, like them as a product as opposed to what they get to do for others. And so selling is serving. And a lot of people, when they have ick around selling, they've either had bad experiences, there's been manipulation, or they've just been sold to based on just like urgency and
Someone wanting to sell something to them and not caring about them.
exactly. And so if you're right now having struggles around selling, maybe it's because you just prioritize the feature and benefit of, let's say, your product or your coaching or what it is that you do. But there's a really good book called Copywriting Secrets, and he talks about the emotional pull, which is essentially going into well, this means that phrase, right? And a lot of the times when we're connecting with anyone, stories will really create trust and emotional connection. And so, what we really want to do, if we ever do any copywriting formulas or even sales formulas, it's always going to be around pain, agitate, solution, right? But what if you could utilize your own experiences and what you've been through to then show the audience, this is something I've done and this is going to be relevant to you because this means that. And that's what has really changed the game for myself, and then you're probably asking, what's the formula? What's the formula? going back to what I said before, everything is a theme in what you do, and everything has the ability to become a micro topic. So, whenever I jump on my stories or whenever I'm connecting with anyone on a sales process, I think it's so important to have relatability and a connection piece that you can share. And naturally, it's going to come really easily in time. But if you guys can see that storytelling doesn't have to be complex, it can be really simple. It could be literally just, anything right now. Like you and I already have connected around certain things when it comes to Anzac Day and public holidays and what we believe in, right?
Mm.
I think it's just putting energy into like looking at the macro topics you have in your company or as your product or coaching business that you have, and really going into like themes and micro topics that you can then see stories that you've gone through certain things. And it's always not, this is again the big thing that I really think is important. And Alex Hormozi talks about this. It's making sure you're not going, this is what I do and this is what you have to do. It's, I've actually tried this because this is what's happened with me. And if this is something that feels really connected with you, then by all means, I'd love for you to work with me and see if this is the right path for us. Do you see the difference between like, buy my shit, feature benefit, call to action, or when you can actually
Yeah, right.
an emotional state? So I've just gone down a rabbit hole. I hope you don't mind. But yeah,
No,
that's,
I love this.
I think, again, authentic selling also is really important to call people out on their bullshit and hold people to a standard. And I think when you're really big on storytelling and selling to sell, like that way, you start to become authentic in selling, which means you also are truthful on a sales call. And that means, reframing questions, NLP languages. It also means like shutting up and listening. It means being honest and transparent and just being certain within yourself.
I've just picked up something there and I want to go down this rabbit hole because you said being truthful on a sales call. And anyone that's listening is probably like, well, of course, I'm always truthful. But I believe that so many people struggle with selling because they don't 100% believe what's coming out of their mouths. Can you
Mm.
talk a little bit into this? Because they're not really going out to be manipulative or lying, but they're not, there's some sort of block or friction there. What can you talk about in regards to that?
It comes back down to themselves, I feel. Before I really became really confident, and we're always learning and growing. I can't tell you that
Mm-hmm.
I'm perfect at selling, but I went through a phase where when I was on calls, I wasn't truthful to myself. I wasn't certain within myself. Therefore, whatever I said, it felt icky and stagnant because all I was worried about was one, making money, and two, not about the other person, but more about how I was coming. And so when we're not truthful, it could essentially just be more around how we are as a person, but also we're scripted, we're following someone else's process as opposed to just having a framework that works for you. And Eli Wilde talks about this, who I'm absolutely obsessed with, just like acting and just like, being a main character of your own movie, the script gets to be tweaked and changed as we get to work on ourselves. And so sometimes it's not a matter of the strategy in sales, it's the strategy within yourself, which is your belief system, how you are as a person. So that I feel gets to be something for all of us to explore, that we see this as a 24/7 thing, working on ourselves so that we can really show up as truthful and as authentic on that call to really serve that person, and being okay to go, okay, this is not the right fit, or like holding them to a standard. Like I've just said, I've just picked up that, you've said something about, you know, excuses and objections and stuff. Tell me more about that. Or why do you keep saying this? And again, it's just more practice and more progress. I find that that's going to be a really big thing with anyone when it comes to anything, when it comes to selling and storytelling.
Yeah, I love that so much. Let's talk about more about the branding piece. We've talked about it a lot, but I want to sort of bring it to the other side of the storytelling. You're talking about storytelling to sell. What about the showing up piece and
Mm.
like bringing the branding in? Because there's times where, you were quite authentic and said, I'm wearing my trackies. And for all of our US listeners, she means tracksuit pants.
Oh
But
yeah.
if you don't understand what I'm talking about, sweatpants. But you've got a brand that's very polished, very put together, very, queendom. How do you bring that into your everyday branding when you're telling your stories?
So, one of the biggest things when I was navigating through what I stood for online, I actually really started to understand that branding is essentially these things like I've got a little acronym for everything, right? But branding, when it comes to like showing up, that essentially means being bold, and that's the personality of you as a person. I always believe that being bold is also light and shade, dark and light. And that means also, if you're going through stuff or, it's hard to show up, especially when there's a lot going on. It's like, how can you still be showing up as best as you can as your brand? And I think that's really important, that people don't just get to see the glossy version of you, but also the side of you that you feel, may get less views, likes, and engagement. But it's in those moments where people get to see you're human. And I think a lot of people think branding isn't about the perfectionism, which I struggle with sometimes too, because I come from a dance background. I always felt like I had to be perfect and looked a certain way. But I really believe it's in the moments where we can call ourselves out and show people that we're human. People want to be more around people like that, like being able to show that you're going through hardship. So then the R is all about relevance, and again, like being relevant in not just business, but like your lifestyle, like what you're into. When I understood my story, and I think this is important for everyone to know, I was homeless when I was 12. So perseverance and building a life, and we spoke about values, right? Freedom was really important to me, and having a life that really allowed me to never go through something like that, or my family. When I was putting together, what I stood for and what Queendom is about from a color tonality, right? I realized as a personality myself, I really chase the wealth, the Louis Vuitton, the beautiful holidays. But me as a person listening to me now, I'm weird, I'm quirky, and I really, really identify like with the outs, like the colors of pink. So sometimes when you're focusing on emotions and your brand, what are the colors that really represent you as a person from everything, And I think, again, this leads into the acronym A for brand, which is authenticity. You know, it was something that I actually learned a little bit when I was in the fitness days, because we had to really, be online and build our brand as an athlete. And I would be completely depleted, yet I'd be speaking on my stories and telling people how I'm feeling. That I didn't realize was authentic at the time, but I was at least using my voice to connect with my audience. And so then when we're looking at branding, that's when niche comes in, the ideal client is essentially a version of you. And sometimes it's just a matter of looking at what you were like a few years ago to see how that can represent for you as a brand. And then the last bit to brand is D, which is delivery in like the tonality, the voice, and again, the colors, the aesthetics. That's when we start to piece it all together. But it's essentially what I love helping people when it comes to showing up online. And I think it gets to be your version, no one else. And sometimes when we question it, sometimes we just need to fucking do it and see what happens.
Yes.
Ah,
Yes.
right.
Yes. Right. And that piece of showing up as you in the not so perfect ways, that connects with people so much. It gives them permission. So I went to the see Stephen Bartlett earlier this month.
I'm so
Oh
jealous.
my God, it was seriously just he was so good. I actually went and watched him in another city as well. He was so good. But when I met him, one of the things that I said was he'd put up a story maybe a week or two before where he was sitting outside the stage door, and it was a black and white photo, and he just had his head in his hands. And the story was that one of his team had photographed him at a moment where he was jet lagged, he wasn't feeling great, he was exhausted, and he just felt like, oh my God, I can't do this. And then essentially it was like, he had to give himself a bit of a talking to and get your shit together and get up there. And no one else knew this, but it was just this really raw moment that this team member had snapped this picture. And I just said to him, I said, you putting that picture up and telling that story was just the perfect timing for me, because I was at a time where I was exhausted and I was really struggling, and I was just like, oh, you know, if he can do it, I can do it too. Like, just pull your shit together and just get on with it. And he said to me that that particular story had had more replies than any story that he's ever posted, because it's that raw and that vulnerable time that gives us permission to go, oh, we're not like he's not perfect. It's okay for us not to be perfect. And it was, it's that permission piece. and people connect with that and go, oh my God, it's not just me. And it's so powerful.
I love that. It's a big element of what I talk about at my event. And I'll share a piece because I think it's so important. I had a sort of like something came to me a week before the event, and it was, you need to share this story that I haven't shared about something. And it was part of my life that I've never been one ready to share. I had a lot of shame around it, and I also had the fear of judgment, right? And in my first live event, which happened a couple of months ago, I shared this piece about my dad. And what it did in the room was not only just the permission slip, but it was able for the women to also to start to share, but also it was a moment for myself to forgive myself and to forgive my dad. And I think a lot of the times the things that we're afraid to talk about are the things that are going to get people to want to work with you and connect with you. And Brene Brown talks about vulnerability being brave, and it's so important that everyone listening that we really just lean into it. And it doesn't have to be every day, but when you're feeling like I can't go on or I'm not going to be online because I'm going through stuff, I always think about those times of like my upbringing when my mum was always showing up. And that's why I'm very big on showing up no matter what's going on, because it's going to help
Mm,
someone, just like it did for you with Stephen Bartlett. It helps you see, like, if they can do it, I can do it too. So,
absolutely. Oh, I love that so much. Now, you have a free resource for people that have been listening that are like, I absolutely love this conversation. I want to lean more into this. Tell us a little bit about what you've got to share.
yeah, I have you know what, I'm going to give you guys two things just because it just feels really important to do. I have a brand archetype, which is really a really beautiful, like almost like a worksheet to see how to start piecing together your identity as a brand. And I think this is going to be great from a color tonality, your personality, and you get to see in this beautiful worksheet like other like artists, celebrities, motivational speakers on how it kind of represents their brand so that you can go, I'm this and this. And then the other thing
Mm,
for you guys is a framework, which is called the Epic Framework. And it's just going to help you piece together your story as a brand, as well as the identity and connection piece and the purpose of your brand too. So yeah, I'm going to give that to you guys.
I love that so much. So, of course, the links will be down below wherever you're listening so that you can go and grab those resources. I have absolutely loved this conversation. I think it's such a powerful piece to really show up, especially as coaches, because people buy us. It's not like we're selling a product, they're essentially buying us. What is one thing that you really want to leave listeners with today that relates to what we've talked about?
I definitely want to add in, like, when it comes to any turbulence, challenge, hardship, every single day is an opportunity for you to show up, and don't ever feel like it has to be like in a suit put together. Like, whatever your anchor is, whatever that queen anchor is for you, find what that is. For me, I wear a crown sometimes on calls because I'm absolutely exhausted or I'm feeling the feels, but everyone has that element in us. And so I really want to encourage everyone right now that at the end of the day, it's not about us anymore. It's about the greater good, to make impact, to make influence, and to serve. And so with that comes this level of absolute commitment to show up no matter what, but also be authentic in that space too, because everyone deserves to hear your story and you deserve to build and scale a brand that's authentic. And that's all I want to finish up on.
That is perfect. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Tamara, and sharing everything that you've shared today. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you, beautiful girl. And thank you, everyone. Yeah.